Julie with the great courses, and like you, I'm a curiosity seeker. Thanks for tuning in with us today. We have Professor Bob Brier, Egyptologist and all around fantastic person, on the stream with us. If you have any questions for the professor, put them in the comments, and we may be able to answer them. So let's welcome to the broadcast, Professor Brier.
Hey, Julie.
Hello, Professor. How are you doing today?
Good, good.
Good. Surviving?
Yep, yep.
Excellent. So I have to ask, when was the last time you went to Egypt? I know all of us are on a travel ban, but
Yeah.
When did you get to escape last?
I'm actually not sure. I think it's probably about a year ago.
Oh.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you get asked this pretty often. Is it safe to go to Egypt?
The answer is easy. No. No, it's not. I guide people through Egypt once a year, and I've canceled my trips for 2020. I did that several months ago, and even my trips for 2021, I had one scheduled for February, already canceled that. No, it's not. The virus is pretty bad in Egypt still. And I wouldn't really want to eat at a buffet at an Egyptian hotel right now. So no, I'd say wait a while before you go.
That's understandable. How about before the coronavirus attacked?
Yeah, it's perfectly safe, Julie. The people are very friendly. They love Americans. It's a tourist economy, so they're really used to foreigners and strange people coming into their home. So no, it was perfectly safe. They're welcoming. People don't get sick anymore. 30 years ago, people used to have what we always called in Mexico the turistas. But no, not anymore. So it's really safe. In one of my courses, I end up by saying, you've done 48 lectures on the history of Egypt. Why don't you go to Egypt now? And I really mean it. So no, it's perfectly safe when it's safe.
Okay, excellent. Well, hopefully in the coming years, some of us will be able to go on tour with you without worries of a global pandemic.
Right. Don't go if you have worries. It won't be fun. It won't be fun if you're really worrying, am I going to get sick? Is this bad? You can wait another 6 months, a year, whatever you have to do, and then it'll be great fun. I guarantee you won't be disappointed.
That is some sage advice for all traveling. So how did you get interested in Egyptology? I know I personally was always fascinated from a little kid about mummies and how mummification happens. Yeah. Did you have a similar journey?
I wish I could say yes. No, I didn't. I actually got interested in Egypt by an accident. I had already had a career. I had a PhD in philosophy. I had been to medical school. I had done lots of things, but I really loved playing basketball. That's what I did. And I was playing in a tournament, and I ruined my knees. This is many years ago. And I had to have operations on my legs. It was ACL, the anterior cruciate ligament. And I was having operations. And in those days, you were in casts from your ankle to your hip for months while you were recovering. And you do one leg at a time. So you could do one, then you get another leg done. So I was really in bed for a very, very, very long time. And a friend who knew that I really liked languages, I had done quite a few languages. I did Greek, Latin, French, Spanish, all that, gave me a copy of a hieroglyph textbook, Gardner's Egyptian Grammar. And for 8 hours a day, to amuse myself, I taught myself hieroglyphs, And then when the cast came off, after a while, I could translate. And pretty soon I was being asked to translate things for museums, for antiquity collectors, for all kinds of things. And then the university asked me, could you teach a course in our foreign language department on ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs? And I said, sure, I can do that. So I was teaching this course on hieroglyphs. I did it for a few years. And the students in the class said, Dr. Brier, we got to go to Egypt. And I said, that sounds like a good idea. So I wound up taking a student group to Egypt, my first trip, and then fell in love with the country, the monuments, everything. And I said, this is better than what I'm doing now. So I became an Egyptologist. So it's just an accident, Julie. Kind of strange, right?
That is one happy accident.
Yes, it is.
So wait, how many PhDs or MDs do you have?
No, I only have a couple of degrees. I have a PhD in philosophy. I have an MA, stuff like that. But no, not a million degrees.
Sounds good. just a few. So let's see. Do you have any stories, any fun Egyptology dig stories that you could share with us?
Gee, I'm trying to think. I must. Let me think. Let me think. You know what wait. Yeah, I got a good one. A good one. Really,
Okay.
it's a great courses story.
Okay.
I was guiding a group through Egypt, and one of the places I like to take them to off the beaten path places where it's quiet, no tourists, but interesting, and we can see things. And when we're on the Giza Plateau, where the Great Pyramid is, we go to the quarry where the blocks of stone that built the Great Pyramid were taken from. And this is just a few years ago, maybe 5 years ago. I've got my group in front of this quarry wall, and I'm showing them on the wall is a hieroglyphic inscription. And we're together for only 2 days at this point. We just arrived in Egypt. We don't know each other well. And I'm in front of the group, about 18 people, and I'm about to explain what the inscription says. And this lady in the group says, her husband was Andy, says, and she has a kind of Brooklyn accent. She says, Andy knows hieroglyphs. And I looked at Andy, and Andy kind of nods. And I'm not sure how well Andy can do. You know, I don't want to embarrass him, but it was a pretty simple inscription, but not super easy. And I said, Andy, do you want to try that? So Andy looks at it, and he says, yeah, well, let's see. The first word is overseer of the works of Ramses the Great. And then he just rattles the whole thing off. And he'd learned hieroglyphs. You know, he had done the course, the great course, you know, and he'd learned hieroglyphs, and it was really pretty good. So that was kind of fun. And the whole group applauded Andy, and everybody thought it was just great that Andy could do this.
Good job, Andy.
Yeah.
That is fantastic.
Yeah.
And yes, for anyone who doesn't know, not only has Dr. Brier made a course of 48 lectures on the history of ancient Egypt, but we also have a relatively new course, decoding the secrets of Egyptian hieroglyphics. There we go. Focus.
Yeah, you're good.
Well, okay, so here's something fun. I was gifted this cartouche, and let me see if we can get it in focus.
Yeah. Go back to you, I think. Pull back to you. Getting closer, but wait. Getting closer. It's getting in light, I think. Wait. I think it's supposed to say Julie.
Yes.
Okay.
You are correct.
You're okay. Thank God. Yes, you weren't cheated. Harriet. You know, very often I get people who have cartouches, they bought them in Egypt, and they ask me, what does it say? And I'll always tell them Harriet. And
Harriet.
They always look disappointed, you know, it's like,
oh. I've done that to a few people with their Chinese tattoos. Just mess with them. I'm sorry?
You know Chinese, Julie?
It was a minor in college, so terrific. But it's a lot easier to trick people that don't speak it. Let's see. So that was fantastic. So I have some questions about, you know, more specifically about Egyptian history. Do you have any thoughts or theories about the mummies that were recently unearthed in Saqqara?
Yeah. Sometimes you may not know about them. About maybe 24 mummies were found at Saqqara, which is an ancient burial grave. And it's where the step pyramid of King Zasa was built. That's the first pyramid in history. So Saqqara was a very sacred area. So for thousands of years, people have been burying their dead there. And just recently found a tomb with about 24 mummies, and they're intact. That's the really good thing, that the tomb hasn't been plundered. They're still in their coffins. And so it's really quite important. It's probably a family crypt is my bet, large family crypt. And I think it'll be important because when you get mummies that are intact, you can do a lot with them. You can learn about the wrappings. We can X-ray them. The bodies are intact, so we can see what kind of mummification techniques went on. So I think this is a kind of finding that'll be studied for the next few years, and I think we'll learn quite a bit about it.
Oh, that's fantastic. Let's see. Well, something that just popped into my head, I'm not sure why it popped into my head right now, but the fictionalization, I guess, or perhaps the fetishization of the love of Egypt has come and gone throughout the years. And for some reason, the mummy parties of grinding up or unearth or unwrapping a mummy in the Victorian days was rather popular. Why? Why was that such a popular thing in the Victorian times?
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is in Victorian times, we knew a lot less about medicine and things like that than we do now.
It's true.
Um, there was a tendency to idealize the ancient Egyptians, that they were just this perfect, super intelligent civilization on the Nile that knew everything. And the idea was that if you ground up, it was believed throughout the Middle Ages that ground up mummy would cure all kinds of ills. And pharmacies actually had jars that were labeled mummia, mummy dust, and they would give it to people to try to cure them. So even into Victorian times, there was this belief that if you ate a piece of a mummy, somehow you would be immortal like the mummy had hoped to be. But it didn't work, did it?
I mean, we don't have proof of that, no. Doesn't seem like it.
There is a real tendency, by the way, to attribute to the Egyptians much more knowledge than they actually had. I'm a real Egyptophile. I love the Egyptians, but it's not like building the pyramids took high technology and the ancient aliens had to come and show them how to do it. It's not like that at all. It's just a lot of social organization, a lot of manpower holding on ropes and doing that, but it wasn't high tech. So the Egyptians didn't have that much knowledge. I mean, even in medicine, for example, they didn't really understand the function of the brain. The Egyptians believed
right.
Thought with your heart. And that's not surprising because when you get excited, it's your heart that beats quickly, not your brain. So it's reasonable to think, that you think with your heart. I mean, think about it, Julie. That's why on Valentine's Day, we send chocolate hearts, right? We should be sending little chocolate brains.
I would buy that.
So the Egyptians really didn't have that great high-tech knowledge that you see on all these ancient aliens shows. They had social organization. They were really able to marshal their forces and do it very well. Craftsmanship and lots of manpower.
Yes, which with tenacity mixed in, you could accomplish a lot.
Well, it was an authoritarian society. Remember, the pharaoh was top, said it, and it was done. So you didn't have to worry about unions and people striking and this kind of thing. You could get all the farmers and say, I want 20,000 farmers up here at Giza next month, and you had them.
Yep. Yeah. We have some mummy questions. Speaking of mummies, well, this fan asks, what does a mummy smell like? And since you have actually mummified a human body, can you tell us that?
Sure. Well, first, what does an ancient Egyptian mummy smell like? Usually, it's a little bit dusty, kind of like a musty smell. Remember, it's perfectly dried. That's why it's lasted so long. So you're never going to get anything rotting or unpleasant, right? It's going to be kind of musty, like an old attic that you've opened, something like that, I think. There are interesting olfactory sort of stories that go with mummies. An old friend of mine, Viola Posek, was a curator at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She worked with linens, and one of their excavators had brought back mummy bandages from an excavation, and her job, she was asked to wash them, to clean them. And when she put them in the water, they rehydrated, and she started to smell frankincense and myrrh, the spices that were in with the mummy. So it was kind of interesting, a little bit eerie. You get a smell from the past. Yeah.
That is really neat. I would have never expected that.
She didn't either. She said it was a bit eerie. Yeah.
I can only imagine. I think I would have had to question myself and my sanity. Like, am I really smelling this, or is this a spirit sense or something to that effect?
Smell from the past. I mean, you don't expect a sort of smell from the past. Yeah.
Not at all. So a lot of documentaries that are on mainstream historical television, we get to see focus on some of the big names of Egypt, Tutankhamun, Nefertiti, Cleopatra, Akhenaten.
Yeah.
But can you share any of the other rulers that you particularly find fascinating that may not be so well known?
Yes, I have one who is my favorite. I call him my man Sneferu. His name was Sneferu, right? And the reason I like him so much is he's the one who really showed Egypt how to build pyramids. He is one of the first to build a big pyramid. The first pyramid, as I said, was the step pyramid of King Zoser. But then after Zoser, Sneferu took over, and he actually built 3 large pyramids. And like I was saying, the Egyptians didn't always get it right. They didn't have that much knowledge. So when you're trying to figure out how to build a true pyramid, filling in the steps and that kind of thing, he had problems, pyramids collapsing. And he built 3 very, very large ones. And finally, he got it right with the 3rd one. So it's really Sneferu who shows Egypt how to build pyramids. And, you mentioned documentaries. Probably maybe 20 years ago, I was doing a lot of documentaries for the Discovery Channel. And I remember I was talking to Zahi Hawass, who was the head of antiquities then, and I was saying to Zahi, I want to do a show about the pyramids, and I'm going to feature Sneferu. And Zahi said to me, you mean Khufu, right, the builder of the Great Pyramid? I said, no, Sneferu. I'm going with Sneferu. He's the one who really shows Egypt how to build pyramids. And we did it. And we did a very nice show on Sneferu. The people were shocked to see the kinds of things that he built, just fabulous things.
Very nice. Very nice. Your man, Sneferu.
Yeah. It's also really nice. I love this. In the show, they gave me pretty much carte blanche. We could go anywhere we wanted to. We could do anything we wanted. It was the era of big budgets. And one of the things I wanted to film was there's a stela, a round top stone that Egyptians used as their kind of bulletin boards, ancient bulletin board. If you wanted somebody to know something and you were pharaoh, you had it carved on this big round top stone and put in front of a temple where everybody would see it. Well, Sneferu had a stela carved, and it had all of his names on it, his titles, his various titles. And one of the things it also showed, was a picture of Sneferu himself, which I think is a portrait because it looks like he has a kind of receding chin. He looks a little bit like a nerd. And so I'm doing this on TV, and the stela is out in an open-air garden just in front of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. So I've got a group in front of it, and I'm sort of explaining to the TV camera about this stela of my man Sneferu, and I say, oh, look at him over there. Doesn't he look like a nerd? And I talk about the names. And, so the show went out on air, and everybody liked it. It was pretty successful. And the next year I was back in Egypt, and I'm going into the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, and nobody ever went to this Sneferu stela, this stone that Sneferu had erected. And I saw a local guide there with his group. And he's pointing at it and he says, look, doesn't he look like a nerd? And after the show, all the guides started taking their people to Sneferu's stela and showing them. I felt that was so great, And then whenever I walk by the stela, sometimes a guide will come over and say, oh, doctor, I tell them about it now. I tell them about it. So it's really good to spread the word. And everybody now knows about Sneferu.
You got a popular nerd on your hands. It looks like we have a few fans that are also Team Sneferu.
Look at that.
We got some Sneferu is awesome.
Sure.
Good old Sneferu. Gotta love it.
Wonder we should make T-shirts.
We should make T-shirts. Ooh. We'll think on that. So we've got some fans asking questions, and I even saw that we have a fan as young as 11 right now who's taking your course on lecture 41 at this point.
Wow.
But what is your favorite dynasty?
Skylar. I think I like there's 2 dynasties really. One is I like the 4th dynasty because that's when they learned how to build pyramids. But I think it's the 18th dynasty that really is so interesting because there's lots of intrigue. It's the dynasty of Tutankhamun, who, according to my theory, may have been murdered. And then you have Akhenaten, who's the pharaoh who changes the religion, the heretic pharaoh. He changes the religion. So I think it's the 18th dynasty that really has all the intrigue, but the 4th dynasty has a lot of engineering aspects, and they're both interesting for equal reasons.
Very, very cool.
Cool.
Let's see. We also have... Looks like we're getting recommendations for a mug. Yes. My man Sneferu mug.
T-shirts, mugs, this is good. We have no shame, we'll sell it all.
We've got the merchandising to a T right now, Professor.
Every 48 lecture series, you get a free mug or T-shirt with Sneferu on it.
I'll bring that up to the marketing team.
Good.
Let's see. One of our fans here has been teaching, and excuse me if I'm looking to the side, that's where my questions are to chat with you fans. One of our fans is studying Egyptology right now in New York City, and he is speaking to one of the questions about the diet. Recently, he read an article showing how Egypt is interested in looking at honey as a pharmaceutical substance. And during this pandemic, what is the ancient Egyptian for honey?
Oh, I'm trying to remember it. I'm not, wait, I'm trying to remember it. It'll pop into my head. But there's an interesting thing about honey in ancient Egypt, because, honey is antibacterial. Very often, if you have anything else, if you can put honey on a wound, it'll keep it clean, antiseptic. So honey is a real antibacterial, and it'll preserve almost anything. So we actually have a history of somebody, tomb robbers. It's a famous story. There was a large jar, and the tomb robbers come in and they find this large jar, and they're starting to dip in, and it's honey, and they're eating this ancient honey, and then they realized there was hair in it, and it was a mummified child had been put in the jar, mummified in honey. And according to tradition, Alexander the Great was mummified in honey. The tradition said that when they mummified Alexander, died outside of Egypt, but he's mummified. And he's mummified in white honey, is what we're told. So honey has a long tradition in ancient Egypt.
I am less concerned about Alexander the Great being mummified as those tomb robbers tasting a mummified child.
Won't hurt.
Won't hurt you. Well, I mean,
maybe not. No, it was in honey. No, there won't be any bacteria.
Well, physically, but emotionally, psychologically.
Hey, people eat grasshoppers.
Ooh, that's true. That's true. Did the ancient Egyptians actually worship cats?
No.
Oh.
That's a common misconception, though. The Egyptians didn't believe that every cat in the street was a god. They worshipped the cat goddess, Bastet, and the animal that was associated with Bastet was the cat. So the cat was sort of sacred to Bastet in that sense, but they didn't think that every cat in the street was a god. As a matter of fact, one of the ways you could curry favor with Bastet was to make an offering, bring it to her temple, and leave it. And what you would leave was a mummified cat. So there were actually cat farms where cats were raised to be sacrificed and left as offerings to Bastet. So we often find cat cemeteries. And I'll tell you an interesting thing. I've studied the cat mummies and quite a lot of other mummies. When we look at the cat mummies, we usually see that they're about 1 year old. They're not mature adults. And the idea, I think, is you raise it long enough so it's big enough that it'll look like a cat, and you wrap it, And whenever we look at the x-rays of cat mummies, almost always the necks have been wrung, the vertebrae are dislocated, or there's a trauma to the skull. They would hit it over the head to dispatch it. So the cats, they're not raised to be adults. They're raised to be sacrificed as mummies. So obviously they wouldn't believe that these little cats that they're wringing their necks were gods. So no, the Egyptians didn't worship all those animals. They worshiped gods who were associated with animals and that kind of thing.
Gotcha.
Sorry,
wow.
People don't like to hear that. I know. I mean, but hey, we eat chickens too.
We do indeed. So would that mean that also falcons that we find that were put in these tombs, were they also raised to be sacrificed, or was that primarily cats?
No, you're interesting that you mentioned falcons. No, there are several different animals that were placed in tombs, large industries, right? Cats certainly. Now the falcons are different, really different. There are ibises also, the long-beaked bird. Those ibises were raised to be killed, right? But falcons are different. You can't raise lots of falcons in captivity. They're wild animals, and you can't raise them in captivity. So when we find falcons wrapped up, looking beautiful like a falcon with the eyes drawn, the same fletchings as on the feathers of a falcon, and we x-ray them, they're usually dummy mummies, what we call. They're fake falcons because they couldn't raise them in captivity. And what you have are a few bones from some other animal sort of added with linen and made in the shape of a falcon and then decorated like a falcon but it's not really a falcon. So the falcon mummies are usually fakes. Yeah.
Would that still work in the afterlife?
Right. Good question. Good question. Yeah.
I wonder. I wonder if they were just like, well, close enough.
Or would Horus the god that you're offering to know? Right.
That's also a good question. I mean, the boats were real, the chairs were real. Did they also sacrifice humans?
No, never. No.
Okay.
We have no evidence at all of human sacrifice. No. And as a
So
matter of fact,
humans were just little trinkets then.
I mean, yeah, I mean, even there weren't many slaves in Egypt either. That's a common misconception. There were never thousands of slaves in Egypt building pyramids. These were all workers who were, fairly well fed. We have the cemeteries of the workers, and we know what their bones look like. And from studying their bones, their X-rays of the bones, we know that they're well mineralized bones. We call them. They're bones that had good nutrition. So they're solid, they're sturdy. So these weren't people who were mistreated or anything like that. These were construction workers who were working for their pharaoh and probably happy to do it. It was an honor.
Fascinating. That definitely is a misconception.
Yeah.
Here's a good question from a fan. What is the most mysterious thing you've come across on a dig?
Wow. That's interesting. The most mysterious. Gee, I'm not sure. It's a good question, and I must have an answer, but I'm just trying to think of what it is. The most mysterious. Well, if it pops in my head, I'll come back to it, really.
Okay, excellent. We're getting a bunch of really great questions coming in. Oh, if you had a time machine, what one unanswered question or uncertainty would you go back in time to investigate?
Yeah, I've thought about that, actually. I did a book called The Murder of Tutankhamun, which is a theory that Tutankhamun was murdered. So a lot of people would think that I'd go back and find out if he was really murdered. No, there's one that's more pressing, I think. I'd like to know about Akhenaten, the pharaoh who changed religion from polytheism to monotheism. He said that there's only one god, the Aten, the solar disk. And I'd really like to see what went on there, what was going on in the reign of Akhenaten. That's the time I'd like to see.
Yeah, that must have been a huge upset to the whole society. And that was just one generational shift, correct?
It was for just 17 years, and then it was over. They had just one pharaoh, and then everybody went. His son, Tutankhamun, changed the religion right back and said, boom, we're going back to the good old days. And he erected a stela, the round top stone, put it in front of his temple, which said, I am restoring Egypt to its greatness. Said during the time of my father, the temples had been closed, the statues of the gods had been melted down. I will change all that. I will restore Egypt. So no, just 17 years, and then it was over.
Look at that. That's pretty quick turnaround for a religion.
Yeah, the religion had been going for 1,000 years. Polytheism, all the gods. I mean, all the people who worship these gods for their whole lives. And you get a pharaoh shows up and says, no, we're closing your temples. Those gods don't exist. They're not going to go along with that.
Not easily, at least.
No.
Well, we have a fan asking, is it true that camels weren't in ancient Egypt?
Yes, absolutely, Scott. That good for you. No, there were no camels in Egypt until the Roman times. The Romans introduced the camel to Egypt. As a matter of fact, what the Egyptians had was the donkey. They had donkeys, and that was it. They didn't even have the horse very much. They didn't use the horse. So no camels. It is kind of curious, though, that the Egyptians didn't use beasts of burden. We don't see oxen, cows pulling, heavy loads, things like that. We don't see that. So camels, nope. As a matter of fact, the Egyptians weren't desert people. They did not like the desert. They all lived right by the Nile. 99.9% of the Egyptians lived right by the Nile, where their water source was. They even feared the desert a little bit. They didn't go out hunting in the desert much, not far anyway. So, nope, no camels. You're right.
Here's a question about the decomposition or lack thereof of mummies. Did mummies ever garner flies or maggots?
The answer is yes, if the mummification wasn't well done. Now, the reason for mummification is to preserve the body, because the Egyptians were resurrectionists. They believed the body was literally going to get up and go again in the next world, so you had to preserve it. So to preserve it, you dry it, you dehydrate it. And what you do is, I won't go into too many details. I did a mummification once just to figure out how they did it exactly. And they used a material called natron, which is really salt and baking soda. It occurs naturally in Egypt, and you pile it on the body and you take out the internal organs and all that because you want to get rid of the moisture. Now, if you're an ordinary guy and can't afford mummification, it's an expensive process. It takes 400 pounds of natron to dehydrate a body. It has to be hauled in. It has to, so it's quite a process. So if you couldn't afford it, you might not be mummified in the sense of they won't take out your internal organs. They won't take out your brain. They won't do any of that. What they'll do is maybe they'll wrap you in your old bed linens and your sheets and then place you in the ground. Now you're moist. So when you go in the ground moist, then you can get maggots. Then you can get, flies lying on you, laying their eggs, things like that. So very often, if we find a body of a poor person, all the soft tissue, the flesh, the skin, is gone, eaten by maggots, and what we have left are the bones. So that's when you'll get maggots or flies on a body when it hasn't been mummified properly and it's put in the ground when it's still wet.
That makes sense. That
Yeah.
definitely tracks. Another fan is asking, are there any places that still practice mummification as a religious ceremony today?
Interesting. The answer is sort of yes. I had an interesting experience. I did a TV series many years ago, which was about my research, which was called Mummy Detective. I do investigate mummies other than Egyptian ones. I've looked at Vladimir Lenin, for example. I was interested in how Evita Peron was mummified. And one of the mummies I had heard about was a guy named Wu Sha in China, a monk. And according to the legend stories, he had been mummified by his fellow monks. They had gathered around him with candles and held a vigil around him and dehydrated the body that way. And in his monastery, on top of a mountain in a place called Juwashan, really remote, was the mummy, or the supposed mummy. Now, I'd seen pictures of it, and it's gilded. It looks like a statue in lotus posture. He's seated, legs crossed, and it really looked like a statue. And I was kind of curious, is it really the mummy of Wu Sha, or is it just a statue that takes on this story? So I went there. The great thing about the documentary, Discovery was giving me a budget for whatever I wanted to do, as long as they could film it. So we go to Juwashan, the sacred mountain. We climb up, and it's an interesting place. It was in the dead of winter. It was cold. And the only food they really eat there are mushrooms. They're vegetarians. And they had like 23 different kinds of mushrooms, dried mushrooms. We went to the market and we picked out our mushrooms. We had a mushroom dinner. And the next day I go to the monastery and I asked the monks, can I see him? And they say, yes. And he was there. And what I could tell by looking at him, indeed he was gilded. They had put a kind of gold paint over him. But you could see the anatomical structure. In other words, you could see the musculature of the forearm, of the elbow. I could see the radius and the ulna. This was really a person in there. So they really had mummified him. So sometimes in Buddhist tradition, they will mummify. Sometimes.
Yeah. Wow, that's really fascinating.
Even, go a little further, just a little further. It's a little bit like that with the Catholic religion. Mm-hmm. And for example, when the Pope was shot, one of the popes was shot, they had to take out part of his intestine, and they preserved the part of the intestine that they had to take out, because the idea was he's so holy that perhaps on Resurrection Day he might want to be complete. So there's some little sort of artifact of mummification there, but not really.
Yes, and some of the saints that have been embalmed. Or mummified.
I had a chance to investigate a nun, Beata Christina. Her name is beatified.
Yes.
Before you're saint, right? Before saying she's Beata Christina of Spoleto. She's in Spoleto, Italy, and her body was supposedly miraculously preserved. The stories are for the saints; their bodies are miraculously preserved because they're called the incorruptibles. They are so holy that their bodies won't rot. And so I got to investigate with a friend of mine, Gino Foniciari, an Italian paleopathologist. Paleopathologists study diseases in the ancient world. So we're used to working with old bodies, looking at what we find. And we got to examine Beata Christina. She was in a reliquary in a glass case, and they allowed us to take her out, and we could examine her. And we found that she wasn't naturally mummified. It wasn't miraculous in any sense. Her fellow nuns had loved her so much that they wanted to preserve her. And in their very, very simple way, they had tried to preserve her, and they took out the internal organs. You could see an incision down her sternum. They had removed the internal organs and then sewn her back up. So Beata Christina wasn't exactly miraculously preserved, but again, it's an attempt at mummification, at preserving the body of a saintly person. Yeah.
Fascinating. Wow. Yeah. I've also heard, speaking of people that have been unusually preserved, the soap lady of China. Have you ever seen her?
Not China. The soap lady is the soap lady. There may be one in China. It could be. But there's one at the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia. There's a soap lady. It's a naturally occurring thing. When people are very heavy, when they're obese, it's called sponification. What happens is the adipocere, the fatty tissue, basically turns to soap. So and preserves the body. So the soap lady is basically like a big bar of soap. Yeah.
Huh, and I thought my lavender soap was good. No. We have a fantastic question coming in from one of our youngest fans here. Let me find it. From Jordy. He is asking, or he is skipping school right now. Let me put that first. Oh, thank you. And he wants to know if you've ever seen King Tut.
Yeah. Interesting. Many people have seen King Tut's mummy. It's surprising, but as you know, King Tut is the only pharaoh ever found in his tomb intact. And because Tut was inside his tomb in the Valley of the Kings, the Egyptian Antiquity Service decided to leave him there. So King Tut is still in his tomb in the Valley of the Kings. And when people go to visit the tomb of King Tut, he's there in a glass case on the side on the left when you come down. So King Tut is still there. They may be moving him soon. Egypt is building a new museum to be completed next year called the Grand Egyptian Museum, and they may move him to the Grand Egyptian Museum to be with the other treasures of Tutankhamun. But yep, I've seen King Tut.
Very cool. I count me and probably Jordy as jealous. Well, let's see. Dr. Brier, I have wanted to know this answer for a very long time. Years ago, you and your coworker mummified a human, which we've mentioned, and using the traditional methods. I'm curious to know how that has come along.
Yeah, it's about 20 years now since we mummified him. And what I like to say is he's dead and well. We were worried that he might decay had we done it properly. We tried to do everything the way the ancient Egyptians did it. We really did. We used ancient tools or replicas of ancient tools. I removed the brain through the nose, right, using a long instrument like a coat hanger. We took out the internal organs. We dehydrated them. We covered them in natron for 70 days. We did everything the Egyptian way. And then we wrapped them and we left them at room temperature, right, just to see what would happen. And we checked on them about every year or two in the beginning. We were pretty sure we did it right because there was no bad smell, right? No maggots got in him, no putrefaction. He didn't smell terribly. And we check on him every 5 years now, roughly, and he's fine. So it looks like we got it right. It looks like it, but yeah. That's
fantastic. If you're taking commissions, I'll put my name on the waiting list.
I have had a couple of offers, one from a rock star whom I will not name, and from other people, but I don't do this professionally. I just did it once, and that's it.
Fine, so be it. Let's see. We have a question. Did humans develop engineering? How did humans develop engineering so quickly? The step pyramid at Saqqara, Egypt, built in 60 to 30 BC, and the invention of the wheel in 3500 BC. How did we go from that those engineering marvels so fast?
Mm-hmm. I think the answer is we didn't. I don't think it's as fast as you think. I mean, it takes centuries for this progress. You know, we have such a short sort of history as say Americans. You know, the United States went bananas in 1976 for its bicentennial, 200 years. Woohoo! I mean, the Egyptians lasted for more than 3,000 years. So we seem to think things go faster than they really do. I mean, the Egyptians, you know, it took them more than a century to go from the Step Pyramid to the Great Pyramid of Khufu. It took them a century. That's 100 years. That's a long time. You develop things. I mean, think about us. We've gone from no car to cars in just about 100 years, a little more than 100 years. And think about the steam engine. It took a couple of thousand years to get the steam engine. So not really that fast. The technology isn't that fast. And interestingly, the Egyptians didn't use the wheel. You know, they didn't use the wheel very much. We don't see stones on carts being hauled. The closest they ever used it was on chariots, and that took a long time for them to get to that. That's sort of 19th dynasty, 18th, 19th dynasty, on hard roads. But if you're in a desert country, you know, the wheel doesn't help you very much. Wheels sink in. They used a sled. All those blocks that go to the Great Pyramid were pulled on sleds, right? So it wasn't as fast as we think, and the wheel wasn't as important to the Egyptians. We never see it being used much. There are no pulleys, things like that.
I was going to ask you about the sled versus I've also seen ideas that they rolled the stones on
logs.
Yeah.
I think that's true. I mean, that's undoubtedly true that they use rollers, we call them, but they're like logs, and you can put a heavy weight on a sled and pull it along the logs. I think that works a lot better in a desert country than wheels. So we know they did it that way, yes.
Fantastic. So going back to King Tut,
mm-hmm. Yeah,
you believe he was murdered.
Yeah.
But there has also been conjecture that he was injured and died from injuries in a chariot accident. What makes you believe the murder theory?
Okay, well I'll tell you. Yes. The reason I came out with this murder theory is it goes back, I don't know how many years. I was watching a TV documentary about Tutankhamun, and there was a radiologist, an X-ray person, Harrison's his name, and he was showing an X-ray of Tutankhamun's skull. And I thought that was really cool. And he pointed to a spot in the back of the head, and he said, and over here, this may be a subdural hematoma, which may have caused pressure on the back of the neck, which may have caused death, right? So that's kind of interesting. We're going to get pressure on the brain, the neck to the brain, and maybe it may have caused death. Now, he was very tentative. He just said it may have. And I heard him, and I'm jumping up and down and saying, murder, murder, murder. The reason I'm saying murder is I knew a lot about the background of Tutankhamun. For example, you know, Tutankhamun is married to his sister, Ankhesenamun, sister, and she disappears from history very quickly and under very strange circumstances. Her husband, the pharaoh, dies at the age of about 18 or 19. And his widow, Ankhesenamun, young teenage widow, writes to the Hittite king, the enemy, and says, my husband has died. I have no sons. They say you have many. Send me one of your sons, and I will marry him and make him king of Egypt. Never will I marry a servant of mine. I'm afraid. Now, why is the queen of Egypt afraid? And what does she mean, never will I marry a servant of mine? I mean, there's something going on here that's sinister. So I thought that perhaps, you know, she's afraid, and with the blow to the back of the head, Tutankhamun could have been murdered. Now, as your caller in asks, she heard that he may have been died as a result of an injury in a chariot accident. I'll tell you what happened. About, I don't know, when this theory of the chariot accident came out, about maybe 10 years ago. I had, you know, written a book about the murder of Tutankhamun, explaining why I thought he was murdered, all of this. And I got a call, and it was kind of popularized. I mean, meaning newspapers picked it up. It's kind of interesting that a pharaoh may have been murdered, especially Tutankhamun, who's the most famous pharaoh probably in the world. And there was a big newspaper article about it in the New York Times. And then came this idea that he died in a chariot accident. So I got a call. Now, I hadn't heard that theory that he died in a chariot accident. I hadn't. And I got a call from the Los Angeles Times. I remember the writer's name, Tom Marr, science writer, good writer, and he says, Dr. Brier, I just heard there's a new finding. Tutankhamun died, from a broken leg, is actually the way it was put, in a chariot accident. And he said, what do you think of your theory now? And my feeling was, well, I guess I'm wrong. That's what I thought. If this is new evidence, if this is a real finding, I guess I'm wrong. And I think it's important to be ready to give up your theory if you're wrong. Don't dig your heels in and try to defend it. So I said, I guess I'm wrong. About a year later, I was giving a talk at a museum in Florida about Tutankhamun. They had an exhibit. And they had, as part of the exhibit, the x-ray of Tutankhamun's leg, the leg that was broken that they thought was the cause of death. Now, you don't die of a broken leg. You can die if, say, your femoral artery is punctured and then you bleed to death, you exsanguinate. You could do that. That wasn't in the x-ray. You could die of infection if it becomes infected. But we can tell if it become infected. You see a little bone growth around the area because you're not going to die in 2 days. It can take you a week or so. It wasn't there either. And I'm looking at this x-ray and say, he didn't die of a broken leg. And as a matter of fact, I later published with a colleague an article in the British Bulletin of Orthopedic Surgery about this kind of accident. I mean, looking at this leg, this break to the femur, which is your biggest bone in your leg, that didn't happen from a chariot accident. This is the kind of break that occurs only 2 ways. Now, your femur is a very big bone, big, heavy bone. When we see a break like that, it occurs in only 2 ways: automobile accident and gunshot wounds. It's a high velocity accident. It's a high velocity break. And that's what I published in the British Bulletin of Orthopedic Surgery. So no, he didn't die of a broken leg. He may have died some other way. I certainly haven't proven that he died of as I say, but it's not a broken leg. No. So still, it's probably maybe the best theory that he died of a blow to the back of the head. The murder theory may be right. May.
That's fascinating. Oh my gosh.
Murder he wrote.
This is combining my love of true crime and my love of Egypt all together. It's wonderful. One of our fans wants to know, as an Egyptologist, I imagine you needed to learn Arabic. Is that right? And what about Coptic languages? Any more?
Well, sure. I speak Arabic. That's the modern language, right? And we all know hieroglyphs, and the language are called usually Middle Egyptian. Middle Egyptian. It's a language spoken, say, during the 18th dynasty, during the New Kingdom. That's called Middle Egyptian, right? We all know that. Now, Coptic isn't actually necessary, and I don't know Coptic. Coptic is the last form of the Egyptian language. When the Christians entered Egypt, right? St. Mark comes in preaching the Trinity, etc. So when St. Mark comes in preaching Christianity, I should say, many Egyptians converted. And what they had to do was they were not allowed to write in their pagan script, hieroglyphs, right? That would be terrible to write in that pagan script. So they had to write their own language, which is ancient Egyptian. They had to write it in some other script. Well, the Greeks had been in Egypt for 200 years, and they knew the Greek alphabet. So Coptic is actually ancient Egyptian written in the Greek alphabet with a couple extra letters added, right? And if you go to the Coptic church today, the Copts are and it's redundant, to say that they're the Christian Egyptians, right? Copts. All Copts are Egyptian, and they're the Christians. If you go to the Coptic church, and there are many Coptic churches in America also, and you'll be welcome. If you show up on a Sunday to a Coptic church, they will be happy to have you sit in. You will hear in the liturgy of the church ancient Egyptian being spoken, so to speak. It's still the language. Their text has a lot of ancient Egyptian in it.
Oh, how cool is that? It's not a dead language then.
Not in a way, it isn't. In a way.
Very, very cool. Well, let's see. Our 11-year-old viewer is asking, what is the hardest part of mummification? Now we're getting into the nitty gritty.
Sure. This is not for the weak of heart. No. By far, the hardest part of mummification was removing the brain. One of the reasons I wanted to do a mummification was when I read the various Egyptological books on mummies various Egyptologists commenting on how the Egyptians did it. There were a lot of things that just didn't sound right. Now, I had a little bit of an anatomical background from taking class in medical school, so I knew a few things that they didn't know. For example, supposedly the internal organs come out of an incision that's only about 3.5 inches wide. The largest organ in your body, the largest internal organ, is your liver. And a liver is really big. If you hold your two hands together, your liver will hang over your two hands. It's that big. And can you get a liver out of more like this? We do it this way, see, like that, and it'll just hang over. So can you get a liver out of a 3.5-inch incision? I was wondering about that. I had a lot of questions. For example, if the whole idea of mummification is to dehydrate the body, do you cut the veins and drain it? Nobody ever talked about that. And the other thing is, of course, can you really get the brain out through with a coat hanger like thing, through the nose, right? Through the nasal passages. That's what people were wondering about. And I wondered about it too. Now, before I did the mummification, I was very fortunate. I was working at the University of Maryland's medical school, and they gave me all the facilities I wanted. And I wasn't sure. I was working with Ron Wade, my co-worker, who was the state board anatomy director. And I wanted to know, can we get the nose out before we do this on television? We were doing a National Geographic special on mummification called Mr. Mummy. And we were trying to replicate a mummification. And I figured, let's make sure we can get the brain out. So everybody always said, the body's lying on its back. You take your coat hanger-like instrument, you push it through the nose, break through the cribriform plate, you go in, and you pull out the brain a little bit at a time, and like it says on your shampoo bottle, repeat, and you keep going and going. I tried it. They gave me a severed head. They gave me a head from the anatomy department, which, when you give your body to science, they make good use of it. So, for example, your knees may go to the orthopedic guys so they can practice their knee surgery, and the head may go to the plastic surgery guys so they can do their procedures. So I had a couple of severed heads, and I tried to take the brain out through the nose this way with the little coat hanger. It did not work. It didn't work at all. And that was by far the hardest thing to do. So I finally figured out how they did it. Finally, we used this coat hanger-like instrument. We went in and we broke through the cribriform plate, went into the cranial vault, and then we turned the coat hanger thing around and around and around, kind of like a kitchen whisk, and we liquefied the brain. Then we turned the body upside down, and the brain ran out through the nostrils, right? We went in bilaterally, went in both ways, right? Making a large hole, and then the brain ran out kind of looking like a strawberry milkshake. So what we did was we figured it out, but the brain removal was really the hardest part. And again, it shows they really didn't understand the function of the brain, because if you're going to resurrect, you're sure going to need your brain. But they threw it out. They threw out the brain. We never found a brain in mummification. Right? So certainly the hardest part was removing the brain. But I should say, don't try this at home, kids.
Do not try this at home. You'll give yourself a lobotomy. Not good. Fascinating and a little bit disgusting, and makes me rethink strawberry milkshakes.
Right.
One of our fans asked, what was the most beautiful thing you have seen on your travels to Egypt?
Interesting. Egypt is just so beautiful. There are so many things. I mean, one of the things that's really incredible is sunset on the Nile. It's not, it is ancient, but it's really a beautiful thing to see, because the air is always clear in Egypt. It's almost always clear, and you get sometimes you get a little bit of sand in the air, so you get a kind of orangey, red orange. So that's really beautiful. But also some of the temples, and tombs. There's a difference. The temple is a place of worship, and a tomb is a place of burial. And I think probably the most beautiful tomb in all of Egypt really is the tomb of Nefertari, the wife of Ramses the Great. And it is just so spectacular. I think it's because it's on a white background. They painted the entire tomb a bright white, and then they painted the scenes on it. And it's kept its it looks like the day it was painted. So it's really beautiful. So that's one of the finest things I've seen.
That sounds delightful. And so does the sunset on the Nile. Well, we're coming up to the end of our hour, but we have tons of questions in queue still. So Perhaps we'll have to have you on another time.
We can do it. We can do it.
Excellent. You heard it here first. It looks like a lot of people also feel that they'll never look at strawberry cake, not strawberry shortcake, strawberry milkshakes the same way. And if anyone is wondering if I am overacting or if these are my real reactions, no, my friends, these are the real reactions to these real historical things. So I want to say thank you, Professor. Where can we find you? And do you have any books that we could do some extra reading before or after we're done with both of your courses?
I have a website.
Okay.
And they could find me there on a website.
Excellent.
As to books, I'm trying to think what I think they would like the most. There's one book that I did recently. Wait, I have it here. Wait. This is it. Find my book. It's called Cleopatra's Needles. It's one of the books I really like that I did, and it's about the obelisks that were taken out of Egypt in the 19th century. 3 obelisks left Egypt in the 19th century. One went to Paris, one went to London, and one went to New York. And each one has a fascinating story. It's an engineering story. It's a mystery story. They're all different stories. And what I try to do is I tell the history of obelisks in Egypt, and then tell the stories of the obelisks that left Egypt. And you know, almost all obelisks are called Cleopatra's Needles, but these are the lost obelisks of Egypt. These are the ones that left Egypt.
Let's see. Do we get one of the T-shirts if we visited all 3?
Interesting. No, you get a Sneferu T-shirt.
Yes. Okay, I think I've earned myself a Sneferu T-shirt now. Who else has? Put it in the comments.
Paris, but they don't see the one in London. The one in London is a little bit hard to get to because you have to cross this road. There's a big road, and you take the tube station is Embankment, and that's where it is.
How wonderful. So anyone out in London, or in Paris for that matter, or New York City, go find your needle.
Yes, absolutely.
And then read about it in Professor Brier's book. Well, Professor, thank you so much for taking the time out to speak with us and humor all of our mummification questions.
No.
It's been an absolute delight.
People should go to Egypt. They won't be disappointed. Go to Egypt when it's safe, and you'll love it.
Oh, definitely. I'll reserve spots on your 2022 trip over there. Well, for everyone, you can find Professor Brier's courses, Decoding the Secrets of Egyptian Hieroglyphics and the Ancient History of Ancient Egypt on the Great Courses Plus, where you could find it and tons of other courses on history, science, philosophy, pretty much everything, right there on the Great Courses Plus. Don't forget to like the Great Courses at the Great Courses on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, pretty much any social platform we're on to stay up to date with our upcoming courses, interviews, and much more. So until next time, be a curiosity seeker, never stop learning.